CityWorks Expo is a collaborative, co-creative, and multidisciplinary idea exchange and festival conference that happens each fall in Roanoke, Virginia. By day, attendees are immersed in thought-provoking presentations, riveting performances, and engaging dialogue. By night, the conference continues with after-hours networking opportunities during street festivals, parties, and musical events. To learn more about Expo, visit cityworksexpo.com. Expo 2014 was made possible by these fine sponsors.
Doug?
Hello.
I'm Aaron. Can you guys hear this?
Is this one working? Now
So
it's working?
we've had this really interesting experience in New York City. Doug and I both live in Brooklyn over the last few years, where we've seen an incredible change take place on the streets of New York City, and we've been very involved in trying to make this change happen. We sometimes call ourselves a part of the livable streets movement. And one of the interesting phenomena that we've experienced as part of this change, making streets better for bikes and pedestrians and transit riders, has been something that Doug and I refer to as Bikelash.
A Bikelash is a natural outgrowth. People are hesitant when any kind of change happens in their community. It's not just bikes. It's a pedestrian plaza. It's a park bench in front of someone's restaurant where there never was a park bench before. Why don't you put that somewhere else? We just kind of, because we're the bike guys, identified this stuff through the framework of bikes. And we identified Bikelash and became sort of like epidemiologists of Bikelashology. We became not doctors in real life, but we play them on the internet. And we identified this phenomenon called Bikelash. So what is Bikelash? Bikelash is, when a community board member stands up and says, I hate bikes, they're always running through red lights, no bike lanes on my street.
Or all of a sudden the most elderly, longest-running columnist at your local paper suddenly becomes very interested in bicycles. This is usually a symptom of Bikelash.
When a politician is sitting in a traffic jam and blames the entire thing on that new bicycle because there was never traffic in your city until they put that bike lane in, that's Bikelash.
Right. Or Bikelash may be all of a sudden people who never really cared about bicyclists or their safety are suddenly pushing, say, a law for everyone to wear helmets. That is a classic Bikelash symptom right there.
So we're going to run through a couple of what we think are the most notorious patients, so to speak, in this disease called Bikelash, and we hope that you will use them as examples for stuff. It doesn't have to be bikes like we said, but these are just kind of the greatest examples. And the first one Aaron will explain is what we call the patient zero of Bikelash, which dates back to before 2009, and that's Prospect Park West, right up the street from where both of us live.
And we should just say, to start, we urge you not to take any other medical advice from either of us on any matter other than Bikelash. So just to get going here, so Prospect Park West, it's a 1 mile long street in Brooklyn, New York. That's a little tough to see, but that's Manhattan at the top, Brooklyn in the middle. Prospect Park West runs along Prospect Park, which is a very beautiful park in the center of Brooklyn. It's a pretty fancy street overall. This is a very nice neighborhood that's been gentrified and gentrified and gentrified numerous times since the 1800s. It's been gentrified all the way up to $9 million townhouses at this point.
Actually, in the time it took Aaron to just complete that sentence, it's probably up to 10 million.
Sorry.
So,
yeah, you can't live there. Just let's put it that way.
I don't know how I'm going to stay.
You had to get there like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So pedestrian safety has always been a problem. In fact, the Brooklyn Dodgers, some of you may know, that was named after the fact that people in Brooklyn were trolley dodgers. They were dodging trolleys on the streets. Then they started dodging cars. They once had a death-o-meter at the very end of Brooklyn, of Prospect Park West. Now, the street, by the time Doug and I got there and started living in Brooklyn, the street kind of looked like this. It was basically a 3-lane highway. You saw people going 55 miles an hour down the street pretty regularly.
The speed limit in New York City uniformly is 30 miles an hour.
And in 2010, the New York City Department of Transportation, after lots and lots of advocacy work, changed it to what you see above. So they sort of shifted the cars over 1 lane and created this protected 2-way bike lane along the edge of Prospect Park. This move really transformed the street overnight it was a total game changer. So all of a sudden, a street that was, cars moving 55 miles an hour terrifying to cross, divided the neighborhood from the park, became this place where little children could ride a bike with their parents. Elderly people could finally feel safe crossing the street because they only had to cross 2 lanes of slow-moving traffic instead of 3 lanes of highway. And DOT began collecting data and right away began to see, speeding was way down, cyclists were off the sidewalk and using the bike lane, so pedestrians felt safer on the sidewalk.
Boring. So I just...
it's the data, Doug.
Yeah,
it's the data.
No, data is boring. Sorry, data is really boring, right? Like, the data is boring. I live on this street, and that bike lane wasn't there before, and I feel really unsafe crossing the street because I didn't used to have to look for bikes, and now you don't know which way the bike's coming. I don't care. I saw cyclists riding on the sidewalk, and you can't tell me that they're...
But crashes resulting in injuries are down.
Doesn't matter. So the minute you get into these conversations about data, the things that we think are obvious, right? Like, who could be against this? The minute you're explaining, you're losing. Right? The minute you're explaining, you're losing. These arguments are not about data. They're not about science. They're about feelings. And you have to create places that feel safe. And for people who aren't used to bike lanes, they don't feel safe. So we couldn't engage people as much as we thought this was patently obvious to us. We couldn't engage people in that way. And that became evident very quickly.
Yeah. And it became evident in the form, as it often does, in 8.5 by 11-inch home-printed flyers on the windshields of cars parked adjacent to the bike lane with really sort of extreme use of punctuation.
Like we had a very big question mark shortage in Brooklyn for a while after this.
So this was a bike lane that was making people afraid to stop or even open their car doors. Can't park anymore, can't cross the street. Danger and congestion caused by these lanes. So people were upset about this. What was interesting, though, about this particular case of Bikelash, and what makes it sort of a national case study, is the fact that we had some very particular group of Bikelashers here. We had leading the charge former Deputy Mayor Norman Steisel, who was part of the Dinkins administration and the Koch administration, was once the guy who essentially, they said he ran the city of New York, was the operations guy under Dinkins. And we had the former DOT commissioner. In fact, the woman who had been in charge of the streets only a few years before, Commissioner Iris Weinschall. Iris Weinschall's husband is perhaps you recognize him. He's a very familiar.
Aaron, you put the wrong slide in.
I got the wrong slide, sorry. Senator Chuck Schumer. Always make that mistake.
We got a proof before this happened, sorry.
So this was not your typical group of Bikelashers. This was special. And in fact, they had a major litigation firm, Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher. You may know this firm as the firm that represented George W. Bush in a small case called Bush v. Gore 2000. These are the guys that represent your Dow Chemical and your Chevron whenever there's a spill somewhere. And now they're suing a bike lane.
And Jim did a media offensive, and he appeared on New York One, which is a local cable news channel for New York. And you can see the quote, "As a former federal prosecutor, I've never seen something like this." This guy brought down mob leaders in New York City and carted them off to jail in perp walks. Yeah. And a bike lane was like something that was beyond the pale.
Yeah. Our bike lane was worse than international narco traffickers. Yeah. So, and then of course, these guys had incredible access to the media, and it essentially, this one stretch of bike lane in 2010 and 11 launched this incredible vendetta, and these are the kinds of headlines we were seeing. Jeanette Sadik-Khan was our DOT commissioner, so that's where Wrath of Khan comes from. Bloomberg was putting bikes before cops because, bike lanes are so expensive. They're not really. So just a really intense bikelash emerged that eventually started to evolve as a kind of cultural wedge issue in the mayoral campaign. You guys remember this guy?
Yeah, this is not usually the picture you probably recall when you think of Anthony Weiner. So, it's a family-friendly crowd we wanted to be, all right. But yeah, he was freaking out about bike lanes because they became this symbol of who Bloomberg was, right? They just became this thing that you could undo if Bloomberg were to leave office.
And it wasn't just, Anthony Weiner. It was, mayoral candidate Bill de Blasio, who in fact was my former city council member. He was a friend. He's a guy who helped make some of these livable streets changes happen. But all these guys were sort of thinking, okay, maybe we need to sort of, they were testing the waters. Maybe this is an effective cultural wedge issue that we need to test out. So Bill de Blasio is doing photo ops as a motorist. And we had to take this seriously. I mean, we saw what was happening in Toronto, where we had a new mayor came in just a few years before, and he said, you know, roads are built for buses, cars, and trucks, not for people on bikes. He said, you know, it's no secret cyclists are a pain in the ass to the motorists. He said, yes, I have smoked crack cocaine.
There does seem to be a direct link between hating bikes and some form of minor or major political scandal. Selfies, crack, bike lanes. It's like a pyramid. Yeah.
But these guys are clowns, but this happened in Toronto. They went out, Rob Ford became mayor, and one of his first acts was to tear up the Jarvis Street bike lanes, which was the best bike facility in the city that his predecessor put in. There are protesters out there like standing in front of apparently there's such a thing as a bike lane remover machine, which I had no idea that existed.
That's new technology, you know? Yeah.
And then we also had the San Francisco lesson to look back on, which was really serious, where effectively an individual, a single NIMBY guy named Rob Anderson, filed suit using the Clean Air Act, arguing that bike lanes created more traffic congestion and therefore were illegal against the California Clean Air Act. And so bike lanes, you know, had to go through all these tests. There were 4 years where San Francisco could not put in a single bike lane. So we were kind of looking at that and we're saying, like, these guys are kind of clowns. But at the same time...
But this group, of course, they were not clowns. They were connected to the political establishment, to the media. And they ended up launching a very sophisticated media campaign against we scrappy band of bike advocates. They had the power, we did not. And so this would start showing up on the news. Oh, are we getting sound?
But do we not have it plugged in?
Traffic congestion that emergency vehicles cannot get through. So ambulance drivers have come up with an unexpected and possibly life-threatening detour. Here's CBS 2 political reporter Marcia Kramer.
This exclusive video obtained by CBS 2 gets to the very heart of the problem. Rush hour congestion caused by the controversial Prospect Park West bike lanes prevents emergency vehicles from getting through. So anxious ambulance drivers detour to the very bike lanes that are causing the problem. So the creation of this bike lane, what has it done to the traffic on Prospect Park West?
From my point of view, it's made it unsafe.
Park Slope resident Stevens Byrne got caught in the rush hour congestion, caused, he says, because DOT removed a lane of traffic to accommodate a two-way bike lane when he was rushing his 94-year-old mother-in-law to the hospital last month.
It makes one much more emotionally tense and frightened because you don't have speedy access to Prospect Park West so you can get to the hospital.
But ambulances using the bike lanes as a traffic detour could also be life-threatening. Imagine being on a bicycle with a speeding ambulance bearing down on you. Park Slope resident Jason Cusado is a biker.
I wouldn't want to be riding my bike and have an ambulance coming straight at me and having to jump off my bike or swerve out of the way. That seems even more dangerous.
I showed the video to Brooklyn Borough President Marty Markowitz, who says the bike lanes don't belong in some areas, like the highly traveled Prospect Park West.
This is an example, what I just saw, where we're putting lives in jeopardy, not only the people that may be in the emergency ambulance, but also if there are any bikers on the bicycle lane.
Bike lanes are killing 94-year-old women who have to get to the hospital.
Something you should know about that videotape, they placed a camera in someone's house at the far end of the bike lane. So this would be kind of like if you wanted to measure traffic on the subway, ridership on the subway going to the last stop and counting the riders who get off, as opposed to going to Grand Central Station or Penn Station and all the stops in between. So again, this is another example of how data doesn't matter. If they put the camera,
that's boring, Doug.
Right,
that's really boring.
If they'd put the camera in the middle,
I can't even listen to that.
Yeah. Right. So it just shows you that image and narrative trumps the facts.
So this thing got very, very intense. By October 2010. There were groups of people out on the street protesting, and people were feeling it. Like there was very strong sets of feelings around this entire issue?
So this is where Aaron and we actually met over this issue. We met at a community board meeting, and over the years we started really paying attention to this kind of stuff and starting to notice patterns would emerge. And I kind of want to involve you. What are some of the things that you hear people complain about when they're talking about bike lanes, bikes, or cyclists? Anybody? They don't obey traffic signals. Anybody else? They slow traffic, they block traffic. Yeah, they ride two abreast and are blocking cars. They menace pedestrians. Yeah, so we started to hear all of these same complaints. They don't follow the law, they're blocking traffic, all that kind of stuff. I started to notice some really specific stuff that we would hear over and over again. And they weren't talking from talking points, it just started to get out there. So the first thing that I noticed was this claim, this isn't Amsterdam. Because who would want this, right? This is horrific. Look at those kids. Look what he's done to those kids. This is terrible, right? No. I mean, this is wonderful and beautiful, and we look at it and think, isn't that nice that that father is taking his children on this beautiful ride? But we would hear that this isn't Amsterdam. So this happened over and over again. This is Marty Markowitz, the Brooklyn Borough President. You couldn't invent a better character if you tried. What is our objective in this city? To stigmatize the use of cars. Do we want Brooklyn to replicate Amsterdam? This is Gabe Pressman, who was like the dean of the press corps, quoting some people saying, you know, this isn't Amsterdam. We have many narrow streets and a great number of cars and trucks because, you know, in Amsterdam, the last thing they have are narrow streets.
Yeah. It's all 3-lane highways in Amsterdam.
It's just that I don't know, none of you have probably been recently, they paved the whole thing. So, you know, and this is all really ironic because, you know, even old New York was once New Amsterdam, right? So, but then this would deepen and you would hear all of the other places that New York could not be, right? We can't be Amsterdam, we can't be Copenhagen, we can't be Portland. You know, we're getting to the point with bike infrastructure in New York City and in the United States that there are fewer and fewer places that your city cannot be. Because this stuff is happening fast. There's Marty again. Beijing is looking more like New York City, and New York City is moving towards Beijing of the 1960s. Here's Beijing in the 1960s, right? Here's Beijing today.
Clearly what we want to be.
This is better, right?
Much better.
This is in Minneapolis and St. Paul. You know, we keep hearing that St. Paul wants to be like Portland. How long does the snow last in Portland? Never mind, it rains like crazy in Portland. They still have huge ridership numbers. Here's Chicago, a columnist for the Chicago Tribune. This is a city made for people who want to go from point A to point B. I thought Chicago was a place made for slaughtering cows, but that's just me. This is not some Seattle coffee grunge pothead experiment. This is Chicago. And the beauty of those statements is you never have to define what your city is, right? You only have to define what it is not and can't be.
And the people trying to make the change, in this case, happens to be bikes that we're talking about, they are the weirdos and the outsiders.
They're the grunge potheads.
From somewhere else.
So then I noticed another thing that would happen, another kind of speech pattern that would happen. This is an editorial that appeared in the Times in 2010. There ought to be a law. And you can see it says, you know, let's be clear, we like bicycles. And it goes on to explain all the ways in which bikes are great. They're good for solving traffic problems. It's good for the environment. It's good for people's health. But you know it's coming, right? But a lot of people are probably they're not calm about bicycles, and we are deeply sympathetic. And then it goes on to list all the stuff that you guys shouted out. They don't obey traffic laws, they cause congestion, all of this stuff. So I noticed this happen not just in the Times, I noticed it everywhere, and I started calling it, some of my best friends are cyclists. You needed to say this if you wanted to criticize bike lanes. So here's Norm Steisel, who you met before. We're not opposed to bike lanes, we're opposed to this one and the way it was done. Here's Marty Markowitz, it's my favorite. I'm not against bicycles. My wife and I have a bicycle. Yes, between the two of us, we have a bicycle that I bring out for photo opportunities. And it wasn't just these kind of like clownish politicians or neighborhood reflexive NIMBYs. This is a New Yorker writer, John Cassidy, who's an economist. He's published books. He writes for The New Yorker. And he wrote this whole thing saying, I don't have anything against bikes. He talked about how when he was a student in Oxford, he had a bike. When he moved to the rough and tumble East Village back in the day, he bought a bike from, you know, some guy who probably stole it, really saying like, look, I'm on your side. Again, he likes
bikes so much he'll buy stolen ones.
Yeah, he's
not so much.
Yeah. He's so moral about this stuff, he'll buy a stolen bike. He then, of course, went on to trash Bloomberg and trash Jeanette Sudicon and trash all the people. I think in one column he actually mentioned you.
Yes.
So this became a thing. I wasn't the only person noticing it. This is Adam Sternberg, who was writing for the New York Times Magazine. He wrote this fantastic article that I really recommend you Google called "I Was a Teenage Cyclist," or How Anti-Bike Lane Arguments Echo the Tea Party. And he identified a series of things that happen in every anti-bike lane piece. So one of them was preemptive self-exoneration. Look, I ride bikes, right? I like bikes, so there's that. Invocation of humorless cycling advocates. You know, these guys, they can't take a joke. They're so serious. They're so, self-righteous.
Self-righteous.
Yes. Invocation of cycling bona fides. You know, yeah, I used to ride around New York all the time and it was tough. You got killed and you just got back up and you got on your bike and you rode. You didn't need bike lanes. Get out of here. Go back to Kansas or wherever you're from. Reference to America's love affair with cars. We've always been a driving country. People love their Corvettes and their Mustangs, and that's never going to change. Invocation of damnable scofflaw cyclists. They break laws, therefore they don't deserve bike lanes. If we applied that standard to cars, we'd rip up every highway in America, right? So I also noticed a few other ones real quickly. Concern trolling. That street's too dangerous. Why are you encouraging people to bike on it? So you shouldn't make it safer, right? Nobody bikes, so we don't need bike lanes, but this is a bit like saying, nobody drives their car across that bridgeless river, so we don't need a bridge, right? Nobody
uses the subway, so why should we build a subway?
Right, yeah. We have no planes landing here. Why do we need an airport, right? But then we would also see you'd sometimes see this one at the same time, there are too many cyclists, so bike lanes are dangerous. And so you would have people saying, look, nobody's going to use that bike lane, but every time I go out there, I never know which way all the bikes are coming from and I'm going to get hit. It's like, well, you kind of have to pick one, right? It's either empty and you don't need it, or it's busy and you're going to get mowed down. So this thing became so predictable. This just played out recently in Pittsburgh because they're undergoing a lot of changes too. They created this cycling in the news user comment bingo. Like, they think they're in the Tour de France, they don't wear helmets, get off the sidewalk, roads are for cars.
Bikes are for kids, that's a big one.
Right, a bike is a toy,
Cyclists should be licensed, that's a huge one.
So you've probably heard all of these. Bearing this in mind, I want you to watch the next news segment, also from CBS News, and see how many you can spot, because there are quite a few. If I can get the swoops. Sorry. I lost my technical difficulties. Aaron will sing a song for you right now.
I should be entertaining you.
Shoot. There it is. Here it is. Sorry. There you go. Yeah, it's not wanting to come up. There it is. There it is.
Or bike bedlam hits the city. The Department of Transportation starts installing new bike lanes in
very
heavy
unbiased
traffic
coverage,
areas.
by the way.
CBS 2's political reporter Marcia Kramer has that story.
You have to wonder what they're thinking, installing bike lanes on 1st and 2nd Avenues from 34th to 59th Streets, an area already so congested at rush hour you can barely move.
I don't think it's going to work.
Bruce Silverblatt's group, the Turtle Bay Association, took pictures to show how the 1st Avenue approach to the 59th Street Bridge is already congested.
Bedlam. Anybody trying to ride a bike is taking their life in their hands.
There's concern trolling, right?
But CBS 2 saw
It's too
other
dangerous.
potential dangers. Buses come down 48th Street and travel 1 block to 49th Street to turn around. They have to cross the new bike lanes twice within a single block. Tour buses do it too. A 2nd Avenue bike lane is next to the Israeli consulate. Imagine if the man on the bike was a terrorist. And on 1st...
Okay, you can't top that. You don't need to watch anymore. You can't top that. I'm gonna drive.
Yeah.
This is CBS 2. I mean, just so you give you a sense of who Marcia Kramer is, she is the reporter who, in the 1992 presidential campaign, asked candidate Clinton about using marijuana, and she asked the "Did you inhale?" question. Like, she's gone from political stuff to bike lanes. So.
Yeah, chief
Bike lane
political
terrorist.
correspondent. So the man on the bike might be a terrorist. So as you can see, this was an extraordinarily extreme case of virulent bikelash in New York City. What can you do? What's the treatment for this sort of thing? There's a lot of things you can do, and we're not going to give you the full detailed rundown, but we just want to hit a few key points. First of all, advocacy organizations are key. You got to be organized. I mean, this becomes a political fight, and the people who are organized the best are generally going to win the fight. So in New York City, we had a group called Transportation Alternatives that's been around since the 70s. Other cities have groups like Bike Pittsburgh, which just started the other day, and it's literally just a few people, at least at the start, with some letterhead that they create. You've got to put yourself together as an organization to give yourself standing. You've got to constantly highlight the problem that you're trying to solve with bikes. So Second Avenue, it's too dangerous for bikes. Well, one solution would be to ban bikes, like I guess, the folks in the video clip wanted to do. But another solution is to actually make the street safer for bikes. So, we have super advocate Eric McClure, who is going out with his speed gun locally and just constantly showing how fast drivers were going on Prospect Park West and finding ways to highlight that problem. We also found that you needed to show what kind of vision we were trying to promote for the future. So safe streets for kids, for families, for seniors, for everyone in the neighborhood. Not just in a fancy place like Park Slope, but all over New York City. Everybody deserves to have safe streets. So we would do things like organize this special ride for kids and families where all the kids would get a free t-shirt, local businesses would sponsor it. And as these folks were complaining about the Prospect Park West bike lane and sort of creating this narrative in the media like they were the sort of dominant force, we were like, look, we've got 700 families and parents and kids out here riding around on the lane saying that we want this. And that was, even if your local media won't see it, your local politicians, if they're smart, they can count. And that's why they're politicians. They know how to count votes. So you got to show them who you are. Doug and I both are big believers in this. You've also, at this point in time, you've got to have your own media channels if you want to fight bikelash or if you want to make change in your community in general. It really, really helps to have your own social media accounts, your own blogs, and to sort of treat the issues with journalistic quality. You can be an advocate and you can still sort of try to look at things and report on things with journalistic quality, which is what Streets Blog does. It's what Doug does with Brooklyn Spoke. And remember, we have these tools now that just didn't exist. I mean, the old days of the early 90s, the mid 90s, even into the late 90s, we didn't have the internet. This is what bike advocacy looked like. You would walk down the street and you would put cards in the spokes of bicycles to let people know about a meeting that was taking place, in the neighborhood that night. I mean, today it's as easy as a hashtag on Twitter to let thousands of people know that something is going on. And as a result, when folks were coming out to demonstrate and protest against the Prospect Park West bike lane, we were consistently able to bring out crowds that dwarfed the opponents. So every time they came out, we got word of it, put it out on our channels, and boom, we had 300 people to their 50 pretty consistently over and over again. And we showed that we were more diverse racially, demographically, by age, by neighborhood. In every way you could imagine, we were a bigger, more diverse group. And again, if your local media doesn't give that, isn't fair, your local politicians should take note of that. And the final thing is just being a part of the local political process. I mean, I know there's a lot of change makers feel like this process is broken. I don't want to be part of it. I'm an outsider. But we really felt like it was important to bring people out to community board meetings. And there's actually a great tactic in this particular picture where we handed out Dayglow stickers for the bike lane supporters at the beginning of the meeting. So you could see just by looking into the crowd, all these people wearing green Dayglow stickers. And so even if they weren't going to get a chance to talk at this meeting, you could see that they were there. And at the very beginning of the meeting, someone jumped up on stage, and this was sort of illegal, and said, okay, who out here supports the Prospect Park West bike lane? Can I get a show of hands? And all these folks raised their hands. And it was, it was very clear that...
And that counters the narrative that the media likes, which is like, well, the bike advocates are asking for this, but the people who live in the neighborhood are asking for this, giving the impression that it's a 50-50 split and that the neighborhood is divided. And this picture that just got out there showed no, it wasn't, except for like these very cranky people sitting here. There was a really large majority of people who were in favor of it, so we needed that.
And finally, it's critical. I mean, if you don't have the seat at the table, you're on the menu. You're gonna get eaten up. So you got to be there. You got to represent your interests.
So August 2011, I think we actually forgot to mention that they mounted a lawsuit to remove the bike lane that started in March of 2010, and it went through the court system in New York and was rejected. There's an appeal, but it was rejected. And so we won. All of these things really did help us win. And the final stage of a lot of this sometimes is acceptance, and there is Chuck Schumer using the bike lane.
Chuck's on the bike lane.
So, and this actual picture was taken by Paul Steely-White, the executive director of TA, who saw him. Then, I think he threw his daughter out of the bike, put her on the sidewalk, said, "Wait here," and raced back and got this picture because he knew it was going to be valuable. So this was a really important thing for us to get out there. So here's what we really learned. We think that there are ways that you can do this, that you can fight this stuff in your community without devolving into this screaming match, without with holding your heads high, having fun with it, and really saying we're going to do something. I have a background in improv comedy. I work in TV, and I studied for a little bit at the Upright Citizens Brigade in New York City. And if you've ever watched improv, it can really quickly devolve into very crazy situations. But the best comedians, the best improvisers, are the ones who follow these kind of fundamentals of improv. So the first one is this concept of yes and. So what does yes and mean? It means that when your scene partner comes out or says something in a scene, you agree with what they say, and you add information. So if your scene partner comes out and says, "It's raining," you say, "Yes, it is raining, and I have my umbrella," right? And then you can go from there. "Yes, you have your umbrella, and only one of them, let's share it," right? So now we start to learn more and work together as a community of improvisers, which is what we are as a community of neighbors, right? We're improvising all together. Too often, a lot of this stuff devolves into shouting matches, right? And it doesn't work. These guys are screaming at each other, and you're giving the news media what they want.
Right. They want conflict. They want it.
It's conflict, and you don't need that. It's really hard. We're not programmed to say yes to everything. We're programmed to say, whoa, no, I don't agree with you. So, Aaron and I will give you an example of how you might turn that around. We'll give you the bad example, and then we'll give you the good one. I will play the stereotypical bike advocate in the first scenario. Aaron will play some version of that man that we saw in the earlier piece, complaining about how the bike lanes stressed him out.
Okay. I'm walking down the street and the bikes are they're threatening me. They're making me feel emotionally unstable.
Oh, you know what's making me feel emotionally unstable? Your car. I am riding on the sidewalk because
I need my car.
No, you don't need your car. Your car is killing glaciers. There will be no glaciers left.
You're so self-righteous.
Right, so we got nowhere, right? It's just arguing back and forth. But if we can do that scene again, and I, as the bike advocate, the guy who wants change, can stop for a second and say, what is this guy really saying, and agree with him, we might get somewhere. So we'll start it again. Aaron will say the exact same thing.
I am so sick of the bikes riding on the sidewalk. It's horrible. It's dangerous. They threaten me. They make me feel emotionally uncomfortable.
I totally agree. Bikes should not be on the sidewalk. I would like to not ride my bike on the sidewalk. That street out there, though, is really dangerous, and I'd rather...
Because the bikes are dangerous. They're on the sidewalk, and they're threatening people all the time.
You know what we could do is actually, if we just move the cars over a little bit and put a bike lane right there, I will never ride on the sidewalk again.
But I have to drive my car. I don't need a bike lane.
All right, so some people are really impossible, and you won't be able to get... But you get my point. All right. So you get my point. But I can now kind of hold my head high, being like, I tried, right?
If you kept going, you were going to convince me.
We could
have
have gone. We only have 11 minutes left.
All right.
So there's another fundamental, so that's really key, is agree. We're not used to agreeing with people who we have different opinions with, right? Everything is Republican, Democrat, city, suburban, old, young, and it's hard to, we need to find places where we can agree. The second one is a concept that the UCB, the Upright Citizens Brigade, pioneered called the game of the scene. And what does that mean? The game of the scene is what's unusual or funny about what's going on between the two characters. In a deeper level, it's what the scene is really about. It is what, a scene in a movie of a couple doing dishes is not about the couple doing dishes. That would be a really boring movie. It is about the tension between the two characters, the conflict between the two characters. He's going to propose and she doesn't know, for example. So what is the scene really about? So this thing that you saw, Marcia Kramer talking about the 1st and 2nd Avenue bike lanes. What was the game of her scene? What was funny or unusual? It got the biggest laugh, right? Anybody? What if the man on a bike riding by the Israeli consulate was a terrorist, right? So there's a natural inclination when someone says something that ridiculous to not argue with them, right? We know this. You watch any comedy show, this is how the news actually treated it. This is how Streetsblog treated it. They just said, yeah, you're right. Let's have fun with this. If New York City gets bike lanes, the terrorists win. Bin Laden is dead, but the 2nd Avenue bike lane lives on, right? Like, it would not have been interesting or funny for them to deny that, be like, come on, you're crazy. Like, that's not really, it just wouldn't have worked.
Just agree with her.
Just agree with her. Let her keep talking, right? Let her keep talking. What other insane thing can you say if I say yes, right? We saw this when City Bike launched in May of 2013. This is Dorothy Rabinowitz, editorial board member of the Wall Street Journal. She did a video that was posted on their website in which she accused the Bloomberg administration of being totalitarians for putting all these blue bicycles everywhere, because we know that's how like Hitler and Stalin and everything got their thing going, was bicycles, right? And then she said the bike lobby is an all-powerful enterprise. So this got a lot of attention, and Jon Stewart, for example, he called out one side of her game, right? He called out one side of her game, which is, why are you so worked up about bicycles? That's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be to agree, yes, there is an all-powerful bicycle lobby. So someone created this Bike Lobby Twitter account that went on to take credit for shooting JR, for putting a man on the moon, all that kind of stuff.
The crisis in Ukraine is the bike lobby.
Right,
And more seriously, we also created an organization called Streets PAC, a political action committee that gives money to candidates. We decided, let's be the bike lobby if that's what they think we are.
So you could go to these people and you could shout at them, no, all of your signs are wrong, all of your signs are wrong, you argue and argue and argue, but you can figure out what's their game, right? What do they really want? Well, we found out what they really want. We know what they really want. They want to maintain the privilege of being able to drive and park their cars anywhere they want. So, this man is not a protester. He is a bicycle advocate named Jeff Prant, and he called out their game. Bike lane, not on my speedway. He was basically calling out, I still want the privilege of being able to drive 65 miles an hour next to a park. And that picture gets out there, and it just heightens it. And it's like, these people are crazy. How can anyone agree with them?
Jeff's whole game is to show up at anti-bike protests as
that guy,
as the other guy.
So how do you play the game? You've seen, the media has this narrative in mind, right? They know what they want when they call you. They're not going to deviate from it, even if the facts disagree. Your job is to recognize what they have in mind, the game, label it, okay, so I understand what you're trying to do, and then heighten it, play with it. So we have this paper, the Brooklyn paper. It is kind of distributed in grocery stores. It is for all the big city stuff of New York. It's still like a local little paper. It has its purpose. They hate bikes. Their bread and butter for a long time was the conflict of cyclists. They would run this stuff showing these defiant cyclists standing in the way of UPS trucks. They would show this kind of pathetic looking guy. They would show this, a hipster who names her band Bike Lane. So this was what they would do. So what is the Brooklyn paper's game? Like what's their MO? Anybody? Make cyclists look like outsiders, like people who don't live here. They're not from here. They're invading our town. That's the idea. This came back into play. The city of New York is doing this Vision Zero initiative. There's been a big crackdown to end pedestrian deaths, cyclist deaths, motorist deaths, to make it safer. Motorists are very threatened by this. People who depend on their cars are really threatened. And so this group of people in Park Slope said, you know what, well, if the cars who are killing all the people need to be safer, well, so do the bikes. And we know that that's kind of absurd. Like, everybody does have to be careful, but not necessarily in equal measures. So I got this call to be the bike guy for this story. All these car advocates, right? Let's call the bike advocate. And I emailed Aaron and our friend Eric. I said, they're going to make me look like an idiot. They're going to make me look like a real jerk. So I don't think, Aaron said, you know what, you shouldn't do it. I said, no, I shouldn't do it. Eric said, no. Bring your daughter along. See what happens. So they said, we're going to take your picture.
Eric worked in advertising.
Yeah, he's a smart guy. Brought my daughter along. I made up some excuse about how I couldn't leave her at home. I refused to bring my bicycle or my helmet, but I brought hers. And we stood on one of the most dangerous streets in our neighborhood and got this picture. They still ran with this story. They still ran with this picture.
Activists want cyclists such as Doug Gordon, pictured here with his daughter Galit, to get more tickets.
Right. So we made them look like, we made that look absurd. It looks absurd. The argument looks absurd.
Like tickets to a pony ride.
Yeah, she's...
Tickets to the circus.
Do you know why I'm pulling you over? No, because you are adorable and I wanted to take a picture, right? So we created our own game, right? People who bike are regular people. They're your neighbors. It's not funny. Like, I wasn't trying to be funny. I was just trying to do what's called playing to the top of your intelligence. But that's the point. In comparison, the arguments look ridiculous, and you did nothing wrong. You didn't ridicule anybody. You weren't mean. You just told the truth. So Streetsblog picked this up and has been doing this for a long time. I don't know if you want to explain.
Yeah, sure. So there's a photographer in New York City named Dmitry Gudkov, and he basically started doing cyclist portraits just to say, like, who are these people? Who are these outsiders, these weirdos? And just every day would go out and take pictures of New Yorkers on their bikes. And lo and behold, New Yorkers on their bikes look like New Yorkers, which look like everyone in the world, because that's who lives in New York City. And, you know, it's every kind of person that you see in New York, you tend to see eventually on a bike, including Leonardo DiCaprio. So, you know, this has been a really powerful little tool to just kind of counter this idea that the cyclists are weirdos and outsiders.
Now, sometimes this stuff is really serious, right? Like, we've been having a lot of fun with this. Very recently, a woman was killed in Central Park. A cyclist, probably going too fast, swerved, hit her, and she died.
Extraordinarily rare.
It's very
event.
rare that happens, but it's still terrible, and we should be outraged by these things. You know, but you never see the outrage when a kid is mowed down by a taxi just a few blocks away, and we know why.
Not
that
a
is.
rare event, sadly.
And it happens all the time. But the New York Post just went bananas because finally, like, the cork was off the bottle and they could just go at it after cyclists. So they ran this. I mean, the day the Scots vote for independence, these are the two biggest news stories, right? Elmo's in Times Square and cyclists killing people. They ran the picture of the driver, of the cyclist. They never do that with drivers. They kept going. These are consecutive days, 4 days in a row that you're going to see. Speed demons. There it is again. I mean, so it just kept going, right? So this is on every newsstand, It was serious.
For an entire week, every newsstand was like ISIS and cyclists.
Two biggest threats in America right now.
Two biggest threats to watch out for.
We saw it again. Cyclists are terrorists on wheels. We saw another New Yorker writer say, I have no animus towards bicycles, and then go on to trash bicycles, right? Like, they're self-righteous, all that stuff. We saw this pop up on a Facebook post, this woman saying, I like to basically scream at them out of my car and say, find an effing bike lane and get in it. Well, she was a state senator. And again, you can see, like, the reaction in the media was like, yes, I will find a bike lane to get in it. Do you mean the one that is always blocked by the police, right? We just yesed it. We said, yeah, let's do it. So it's the same stuff, different people, same stuff. So how do we respond this time? We issued really strong statements condemning what happened. Someone died, and we need to take the side of the victim. But we engaged our elected officials. And we took the high road. I like to say that the high road has a bike lane on it, you know, that you really have to kind of hold your head high. So what I did to Diane Savino, the state senator, who said that she goes around yelling at cyclists, is I sent her an email and said basically, like, would you yell at me? You know, I drop my kids off at school every day. And this is what you're talking about. This is the culture that you're engendering. And what I did was I invited her to come with me and see the conditions that caused me to not ride in a bike lane, to see that I stop for pedestrians, to see all that stuff.
And did she take you up on that yet?
She has not.
Oh, shocker.
So we're working on it, you know. And the idea, though, is that got out there and it said, look, like, this is who we're talking about when we're talking about scofflaw cyclists. We're talking about a dad dropping his daughter off at kindergarten and his son off at daycare. We're talking about a house cleaner getting to her job. We're talking about all of these New Yorkers who live here, and they are not different from you. So stop this separation. So, you know, we learned a lot of lessons, which...
Yeah, so one, you know, the advocacy ecosystem is critical. And it's not just the formal organization, it's having your own media channels, it's showing up to meetings, it's being online and offline. It's an ecosystem.
Yeah, starting a streets blog, if you don't have something like that. I started a blog called Brooklyn Spoke, which was a much better idea in the long run than starting a blog called DougGordon.blogspot.com, right? Nobody cares who Doug Gordon is, but you put a name on it, and it suddenly seems like a little more official. You can do that with no cost. And the last thing is change the conversation through agreement. Stop arguing with the people who disagree with you. They don't disagree with you. They love their neighborhoods too. They just are afraid of seeing it change.
Yep.
And you are all invested, I think, in the same purpose, which is making a better, safer place. And then you can bridge those gaps and find something that you have in common to create a better space.
There is a cure to Bikelash. Thank you very much.
Thank you.